here. So the word today is epistrophe. Okay, epistrophe is basically the opposite of anaphora. It is repetition at the end of phrases or clauses or sentences. Epistrophe. Okay, so there was actually an example of epistrophe in Equiano's excerpt, and you guys, a lot of you guys talked about it in your says does how chart. So open up to that excerpt again. And yes, you're right, the death of slavery one. Yes. That's the one.
Wait, that's the one where he's like, that part was.
Yeah, clauses.
Yeah, that one.
Okay, so open to the very end of Equiano's excerpt, and you'll see this death to slavery, death to slavery. That would be an example of an epistrophe.
Was it before or after the?
It's after the abolitionist rhetoric. So let's look at that part because a lot of you guys chose to write about that in your says does how chart, and that reminds me that I gave you some comments on those. So I'm actually going to have you pass everything back in that box over there with the folders, and I put them all in alphabetical order now. And some of your names are spelled wrong. That wasn't me, but just ignore it. So it's all in alphabetical order, and I'll just have like 10 leaves row on over. You guys go grab it while I'm. Let's just do this like in an ordered fashion. I should have let you know as you were coming in today. But for everybody else who's not grabbing it now, just write death to slavery as the epistrophe so that you remember what it is. So for the example. You just grab everything that's in your folder. It's all for you.
All for me.
Yep.
It must be
Yep.
Christmas or
And it's a happy Christmas. If you did this one, you got credit. There was also two that did not have names on them, so they're in the no name pile of shame over there.
Is it in
That's so
cursive?
funny. I've never seen anyone spell my last name wrong, but they spelled my first name perfectly. My last name is just Mendenhall.
I think Bjorn got an extra A added to his-
Wait, I did.
on your name.
You better spell my name.
And I don't know what happened. Yes, it's happened 3 times by different people.
All right, once you find your stuff, come sit down. And for the rest of us, let's look at this particular example, and then once it clears, we'll send more over. So it says, wait, but getting your stuff quietly. Okay. Again, getting your stuff very quietly because I'm going to be talking. Okay, thank you. So it says, but they did get the other, and afterwards flogged him unmerciful for thus attempting to prefer death to slavery. In this matter, we continue to undergo more hardships than I now can or want to relate. Hardships caused by, inseparable from this accursed trade, that still causes so many of us to prefer death to slavery, death to slavery. So you get that repetition 3 times, and it's always at the end of the sentence or the clause, right? So why, in this case, I don't have anything to write down. Why add that repetition to the end of the clause? Let's start with the repetition. Oh yeah, Lexi.
I think it kind of has a double meaning of sorts, just the similar placement of
Uh-huh.
because it first says to prefer that to slavery, and then the second one says death to slavery, which I kind of think is more like after death to
Okay, awesome. So it kind of seems like it changes the meaning of the phrase a little bit, like somebody calling an act, like, let's put an end to slavery. I could get that. Kaylee was Rona. Why don't you guys go grab your stuff? What else could be the reason behind repeating it over and over again? Yeah.
I think it's interesting because when you read the passage, it's like really dark and like, oh, that's sad. It's so bad. But when he does it again, you like take it at like what it is. Oh my god. Like I think it allows you like clear headed, just read that part, like it focuses
Yeah.
just on it. Like, oh, slavery, death, then there's death of slavery. Whoa, that's great.
Okay, yeah, I think that's really important here. Like the first one is part of the context of the story. So it is about these people. We should have gone a little bit earlier. It says, however, 2 of the wretches were already drowned. Sorry, a little bit further. 2 people committed suicide by jumping off the boat, right? And the first time we hear it as part of that story. Okay, this is the explanation for that story. But then when he repeats it again as its own sentence, or when he says to prefer death to slavery still causes us, it kind of turns it into more of an ideological approach. Like this becomes like the ideal. And then the very last one, death to slavery, it's like, let's consider this aspect of the story by itself without thinking of all of the gruesome details. Let's consider what that actually means and what a person would have to be like in their mindset to do that. Yeah.
So what I would say kind of along with it, it's like kind of what he wants you to take out of all of that, because there's so much like different terms and like language that he uses.
Yeah.
But like while he tries to do that, it like helps you take that out and like find what the importance and like the call to action kind of.
Yes, I think by especially ending a sentence with a phrase that you repeat over and over again, it's almost like you're giving the moral to the story. It's like what Aesop's fables did. Here's the moral at the very end of the passage. This is what you're supposed to get out of it. And so he repeats that at the very end. So you're like, and this is where you should end up on this. You guys go grab your stuff out of those folders. Yeah, Kaylee.
I think that by putting it at the end of the beginning of the paragraph, it sort of gives it as an effect. Like this happened, and this is the effect.
I like that. So it creates this kind of cause and effect pattern to it and almost gives it that kind of logic where when people are treated in this way, this is the kind of effect to that treatment. Yeah, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Now let's think about, we've been thinking about the placement. We've been thinking about the fact that it is repeated. Let's think about the words that are actually repeated. Death. Okay, let's think about death for a second. That's such a strange sentence to say, but like, why would that be a powerful way to end it? Because I saw a lot of people talking about how this is a really strong word or a powerful word, but what is like so distressing about the idea that someone would choose death over a state of being? Yeah.
Because death to us means like the end of everything that as we know it. So it's
Yeah.
such like a deep topic because it just goes into our own like kind of like it throws us into this like almost like existential thinking of okay, we're dead, what's up? They decided to die and end everything that they knew their life because they didn't protect them.
Right. Okay. So it's like this absence of anything, any sort of affect at all anymore. You have no hope left. And so there's like this existential kind of crisis that happens where it's like, well, then what's the point? So yeah, I think that's right. This lack of hope. Kaylee?
I think that as far as we're aware, there's nothing after that. So it's like it would be that there's not one happy thing left.
Yeah. There is one thing left. It's slavery, right? And you said, but it's not one happy thing left. So it's like, I'd rather have nothing than something if that's something. And that's the powerful idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the last time we had class, for like our how, we talked about, like it attacks the value of life because the only way to like stop the misery and like the awfulness of slavery was death. And because there was no cure to slavery, they chose death, and death isn't actually a cure. It just
Yes.
stops.
Okay, good. So we were talking, you guys were thinking about that idea of like preferring one thing. And it's almost like this can be the solution. They're seeing death as a kind of solution, but when the solution is nothingness, that's no solution at all, right? So it becomes like very, I think it's ironic, this idea that you could prefer death to something else, because once death happens, there is no more preferences, there is no more will, right? There's no more free, at least in terms of the way that this is written. He's not talking of heaven or going to a better place. It's like, I would rather have nothingness. I'd rather have no kind of will than to have my will and my freedom being taken from me in this way. So this is the last way that these people could express a preference at all. And it becomes ironic that the only preference they can express is to get rid of their preferences. Does that make sense? So I think to end it that way, I think the museum chose to end it that way because his story continues. But to end this little excerpt that way is a super powerful way of like, almost like dropping the passage off into nothingness. Like when you end death to slavery, and I totally agree with Lexi that we could read it that way too. But when you end with this concept of preferring death over slavery, it's like you end with that complete lack of hope. Okay, these guys, go grab your stuff, everybody who's left, and then write down the effects if you haven't already. Everybody.
It gives us something to think about, thinking about nothing.
Yes,
You know, like,
yes, it is. It's why it creates that existential crisis, I think. Okay, and then you're gonna flip the page to slave narratives in your packets. I did a pretty good job of going in order in this one. I know for a while. Okay, so there was this project where people went around, I forgot what does it have the name of the organization? No, it was during the 1930s though, and I believe it was a government funded program, one of those Works Progress Administration programs. And a bunch of people went around the country and they were gathering oral history of slaves. So you know, in the 1930s, that first generation of like the generation of people that were born into slavery and lived the majority of their life in slavery, they were starting to die out. And so this group wanted to make sure that they captured all of these oral narratives of people. And so I have collected here a few that I think are very interesting in terms of pathos, like in terms of the way that these guys are trying to, even though it's oral history and they're just telling their story, they're reaching an audience in some kind of emotional way to tap into their audience's values. So first of all, if you were working on your pathos sheet with a group and you guys were all writing the same thing, I tried to give you different comments from each other so that I wasn't saying just the same thing on all of your group's work, so that you could kind of share feedback. So I'm going to give you a second right now to share the feedback I gave you on that worksheet and see what you think about that.
So on the first one, I said,
The underlying torture.
Oh yeah, you don't need to pay attention to what I'm underlining too much.
she said good specifics. And she said good for value of life. And she just, yes, maybe I'm a little unreading it.
They are, yeah, and I recorded the class. So you just watch the class recording and it'll be. Oh, but Sabina, we're gonna do the back side.
Because I have no room to write anything else.
All right, did my feedback make sense? Okay, cool. So I thought you guys did a really good job with this. You're getting at those specifics. I just felt, I just tried to give you a couple hints as to where you could get even more specific. The boxes are small. So for some of them, you're like, well, where was I supposed to write that? I was just sort of like letting you know if you have more space, what you could be writing. Because ultimately, you're gonna have to write pages and pages about pathos and you'll be happy to have it. Okay. So under these slave narratives that I've taken, these oral histories, I've got underneath each one a little like assignment for you to do. So it says, name the argument in one sentence, name the intended audience and be as detailed as possible. underline one sentence that demonstrates pathos. Not all of them say underline, but you're just underlining one from the passage above it. What emotion does that sentence evoke? So just name the emotion. And then what is one language choice in the sentence that creates that emotion? So it's kind of like the says does how chart, but I'm having you do just one sentence per little narrative. Some of them are very short, like if you look at John Jaya's, it's really short, and then some of them are a little longer. I don't want you to do number 6, Alexander Falcon Bridges. It's long. It's a very interesting, but we're going to skip that one. So you're going to do number 1 through 5, and I want you to work in those same groups or pairs that you have been working in to try to unpack how these people are using pathos. It's just extended pathos practice for a few minutes. All right, go ahead.
Can I join the-
Talk about it together. So I want to look at number 4. So this is John Jaya from Old Calabar, Nigeria. So Old Calabar, Nigeria was a really important city for the slave trade. There is the Calabar River goes through it, and so it became a port for places all over Africa to ship human cargo to this port in Nigeria. It was discovered in the 1500s I should say that, in the 1500s by the Portuguese. So like obviously there had been people there for a very long time, but the Portuguese got there in 1500. And so John Jaya, he is born in this like pretty populous city. It's not an industrial city in 1773, but it is like a big city. It's not like a little village somewhere. He's born in 1773, and so he names who his father is, he names who his mother is, and this is what he says. He says, I, John Jaya, was born in the town of Old Calabar in Africa in the year 1773. My father's name was Hamilton Robert Jaya, my mother's name Margaret Jaya. They were poor but industrious parents. At 2 years and a half old, I and my father, mother, brothers, and sisters were stolen and conveyed to North America and sold for slaves. And that is the extent of his oral history of his slavery. So this isn't an excerpt. I took, this project went around to different places in the country and got these stories, and this is what John Jaya had to say. So I want to look at this one because this is the one that seems to be the starkest or the driest in terms of the language. Like a lot of these people, when they're talking about their experiences, are describing it using a lot of imagery and even metaphors and active verbs and so on. John Jaya doesn't do that. So let's talk about how he's using pathos in this section. What did you say you felt like his intended argument was? Yeah, Kaylee. Okay, so I'm gonna it just helps me to take notes. I don't know if it helps you when I take notes, but the slaves are human beings who had lives. And so when you say that, you're saying like he's referring to like the history, his sort of like family tree to show that he has like a past. I'll throw this one away. Okay, good. Did anyone have something different for the argument? Yeah, Lexi. Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about what that was like once he became a slave. He doesn't talk about the experience of being stolen or what the journey to North America was like. He just says, now I became a slave, that's over. I'm done with talking about that now. So I like that as an implied argument. So did anyone else have anything else to say about the argument here? Okay, good. I agree. As far as the intended audience goes, who do you think the intended audience was? I think for this project, it was all kind of the same intended audience in some ways, but who do you think would be sort of listening to these oral histories or reading them? Leah? Okay, good. So audience, ignorant people, no knowledge, woo, of how slavery might affect things. And then when you were looking at, let's like skip to the one sentence that demonstrates pathos. When you were looking at that, it could be one sentence, it could be one phrase. What stood out to you as being like the emotional impact of this little passage? Yeah, Luke? Yeah. Yeah, okay, so like I remember my parents and this is the kind of people they were, right? Tell me about that word industrious. What does it mean to be industrious? Kaylee? Yeah. Oh, how do I spell it? Meritocracy. There we go. Yeah, so it's this idea that if you work hard enough, you can become something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think industrious really implies that they have a purpose that like they have for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so you have like a central goal, you have some kind of purpose, you maybe did not, have a lot of money, but you were still like kind of driven towards something important to you, right? Industriousness also kind of implies creativity. If you say somebody is industrious, especially if you say somebody is poor but industrious, you're kind of talking about how they are able to take nothing and turn it into something. So there's this idea of like creativity there too. And I think that word in particular is really signifying the humanity of his parents. Are there other ways that he's showing the humanity of his parents, even in language that is so dry? Yeah, Gracie?
Well, he just like says their names.
Yes.
So by saying, like, when you give something a name, you show that it has like value and
Yes.
that you have a connection to it. And so for like the Jews, they like during the Holocaust, they had like numbers so that they
Right.
would become less human.
Right, and a very big part of the slave trade too was that they renamed their slaves. So you might have been some name in Nigeria, but you come here and now you are John Washington, and you're going to be John Washington now from now on. And he insists like, this is what my name was when I was born. These are my parents' names. It's like I have this identity that existed before anyone in America ever met me, right? And I think he does that with his parents too. This you'll notice when we read Frederick Douglass, and then we're going to look at some examples from some other longer slave narratives. That's rare to be able to say what your parents' names were. So he's kind of like showing like, I've got this family tree and it means something to me. There's another way that he kind of argues that it's like we are human beings. He says, I and my father, mother, brothers, and sisters were stolen and conveyed to North America. He could have said family, right? Me and my family and I were stolen and taken to America, but he doesn't. He says each of the relationships that he has with family members, right? To say like, these are each individuals that were important to me. And then what do you think about that word stolen? Yeah.
So there are people that stolen that really like get hard. The first is feels like a crime, and like almost everyone can if you take someone that doesn't belong to you, crime.
Yeah.
But then there are people who said that slavery wasn't a crime. This is identifying slavery as a crime.
Yeah.
But other things that it's just very blunt. So it has this like jarring like shock value. Oh my gosh, that like stole it. Like right, it happened like that. If you put a newspaper headline, probably would like stolen.
Yeah, in comparison to Equiano's narrative, where he's not trying to necessarily like figure out their motives or anything, but he is sort of like creating characters out of the slave traders. This guy refuses to do that, and he's just like, it was a crime. We don't need to worry about the criminals. It was a crime. Yeah, Leah.
I kind of noticed that he says sold and stolen.
Yeah.
Like because they objectified them as objects.
Yes.
I think he's using that to kind of show that if we're objects then we're stolen.
Yeah, absolutely. So you look at the very first word of his account, he says I, and it's almost like he's really emphasizing I am a person, I have an identity, I am an I. But by the end of this, he says we were stolen and conveyed to North America and sold for slaves, and it ends with slave. So we move from the human qualities into this way that he's been dehumanized and turned into an object. Yeah, Clay.
I think also that also also adds to like. Cause like, they were taken out of their lives, out of their establishment, out of everything that they built for themselves. and
Yeah.
they were, like, taken out and stolen. Left was like, we have this life and then we like.
Stolen has this super abruptness to the word. And I think this is reminding me too of Kaylee's comment where she's like, it's a crime and it's signifying the criminality of it, right? Has anybody ever had their car or their house broken into and things stolen from them? Those are just things being stolen from you. But when something happens like that, it is like such a violation. It's like somebody has like these objects that I've thought of as my own, someone has come and they've decided that they are theirs instead. Imagine that happens to your identity. Like, it's this really abrupt, like terrifying transition there too with the word stolen. Yeah, Lexi. Yes. Yes, it's not like here was what the situation was, here was like the war and the context for like why someone felt like they could take me from my home. And so no, it's just stolen. And you'll notice there the way that it's worded is in the passive voice. Passive voice means that there is no agent to the sentence that has committed the action. So he doesn't say who stole him. He just says we were stolen. The agent doesn't matter here. What matters is the effect of what happened to him. So the reason I wanted to talk about his particular little section is because sometimes I feel like when we're talking about pathos, we get stuck in this like, we want to talk about all the flowery languages in passages, or we want to talk about like really intense metaphors. But pathos can appear in lots of different ways where the writer is appealing to the audience's values and trying to evoke this emotional content. So I just want to take you back to that metaphor that I always give, which is like logos, ethos, pathos is like a sounding board. And you can turn up one and you can turn down the other, but it's very rare for part of it to be turned all the way down. One might be quieter than the other. It may be that you're really focusing on ethos right now, and so pathos is not as strong, but it's still there and you can still examine it for pathos. Okay, we're gonna switch gears now then to talking about ethos, and this is the last one. So we're gonna read together. This is such an awesome piece of rhetoric. All right, so it's kind of hard to find in this. It's a couple pages on, and it's at the top, it says Letters of a Nation. And it's a letter to Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State. So it's after the I Have a Dream speech.
It's like right after the
Yeah, help each other find it if you can't find it. One of these days I will remember to number the pages. Okay, let me tell you about Benjamin Banneker. That's the guy who wrote this letter. Awesome dude. So he was born in 1731 in Baltimore. His mother was never a slave. She was Black but never enslaved, and his father was an ex-slave, and I don't know how he made it out of slavery. I don't know if he escaped or if he bought his way out. But so he's born a free Black in Baltimore, and he is really impressive. He becomes a mathematician, a surveyor, an astronomer, a writer, a publisher, a farmer, and a surveyor, and a city planner. He did all those things, and kind of at once too. It's not like he was like just going from job to job. It was like at any one time he could be an expert on any of these things. So honestly, he's just a genius, a pure genius. You're going to hear the way that he talks to Jefferson. It's so good. At the time, Jefferson's Secretary of State, so this is before he is president, and Thomas Jefferson was known for owning slaves and for representing the interests of the South. So here's how Banneker writes his letter to him. I'm going to go through and make sure you're understanding as we go, but as we're talking, underline anything that you think is helping to, how to put it, helping to serve Banneker's credibility. So anything that you think is making Banneker seem like a very trustworthy writer for his audience, who is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's always going to be W. Diggs now in my head. which does not quite work for this letter. All right, you'll see. Sir, I am fully sensible of the greatness of that freedom which I take with you on the present occasion. A liberty which seemed to me scarcely allowable when I reflected on that distinguished and dignified station in which you stand, and the almost general prejudice and prepossession which you so prevalent in the world, which is so prevalent in the world against those of my complexion. So what is he saying right there to start his letter? Yeah, I think that is part of it, and he's being sneaky about it. So he's like, I know I'm taking freedoms with you right now, and introducing that word really early on. Laura, what were you gonna say?
I was just thinking, I'm too lowly of a person to be able to write something like you.
Yes, exactly. Like he's like, I'm taking all these freedoms towards you, oh great Thomas Jefferson. But I think Aaliyah is still right that it's like this idea that like, but you, oh great Thomas Jefferson, you'll appreciate this more than anyone because you're like all about freedom, right? And then he says, and I know that I'm like so lowly because everybody has these prejudices against people of my complexion, he says. Okay. I suppose it is a truth too well attested to you to need a proof here that we are a race of beings who have long labored under the abuse and censure of the world, that we have long been considered rather as brutish than human, and scarcely capable of mental endowments. When he says, I suppose it is a truth too well attested to you, what's he saying right there? Haley?
Like, this is something that I'm looking
Yeah, okay, to need a proof here that we are a race of beings. Yeah, I think so. So he's like, he's kind of like, you know how my race has been treated. You know what the rumors are sort of about me. So, but he's like, so you kind of know the situation that I'm under. Okay. Sir, I hope I may safely admit, in consequence of that report which hath reached me, that you are a man far less inflexible in sentiments of this nature than many others, that you are measurably friendly and well disposed towards us, and that you are willing and ready to lend your aid and assistance to our relief from those many distresses and numerous calamities to which we are reduced. So, I know you, though, aren't going to believe those rumors, and I know you are going to want to help me because you are such a good guy. Now, sir, if this is founded in truth, I apprehend you will readily embrace every opportunity to eradicate that train of absurd and false ideas and opinions which so generally prevails with respect to us, and that your sentiments are concurrent with mine, which are that one universal Father hath given being to us all, and that he hath not only made us all of one flesh, but that he hath also, without partiality, afforded us all the same sensations, and endued us all with the same faculties, and that however variable we may be in society or religion, however diversified in situation or color, we are all the same family and stand in the same relation to him. I know you're a God-fearing man, like I know that you believe in a God, and so you must believe that if you and I believe in the same God, we must believe that we are equal. Sir, if these sentiments of which you are fully persuaded, I hope you cannot but acknowledge that it is the indispensable duty of those who maintain for themselves the rights of human nature and who profess the obligations of Christianity to extend their power and influence to the relief of every part of the human race, from whatever burden or oppression they may unjustly labor under, and this I apprehend a full conviction of the truth and obligation of these principles should lead all to. Sir, I have long been convinced that if your love for yourselves and for those inestimable laws which you preserve to you, the rights of human nature, was found on sincerity, you could not but be solicitous that every individual of whatever rank or distinction might with you equally enjoy the blessings thereof. Neither could you rest satisfied, short and of the most active diffusion of your exertions in order of their promotions from any state of degradation to which the unjustifiable cruelty and barbarism of men have reduced them. So if you, if your love for yourself and the laws that you have used to create this country are actually sincere, then I know you're going to want those blessings of your beautiful country to apply to everyone. Lexi. Kind of a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. It's like Thomas Jefferson could have the option of taking it seriously and saying like, he loves our country, he loves me, he knows what a great guy I am, and so he's appealing to me to change the situation, right? But there's also a little bit of like stank in it where he's like, if your love for yourselves and for those inestimable laws, like if you love your, if you really do love yourself, then you should love us too. So he's kind of being tricky about it. Yeah. Sir, I freely and cheerfully acknowledge that I am of the African race, and in that color which is natural to them, the deepest dye, and it is under a sense of the most profound gratitude to the supreme ruler of the universe that I now confess to you that I am not under that state of tyrannical thraldom and inhuman captivity to which too many of my brethren are doomed. He's saying, I'm not a slave, but that I have abundantly tasted of the fruition of those blessings which proceed from that free and unequaled liberty with which you are favored, and which I hope you will willingly allow you have received from the immediate hand of that being, from which proceedeth every good and perfect gift. He's going to keep going along this track where he's like, you are lucky that you got these gifts. I was not so lucky, or I have been lucky of that too, but a bunch of the people, he calls them my brethren, a bunch of the people living under slavery, they have not been lucky. And he continues to use this kind of language of luck, you'll see. Sir, suffer me to recall to your mind that time in which the arms and tyranny of the British crown were exerted with every powerful effort in order to reduce you to a state of servitude. What is he talking about there? Yeah, the Revolutionary War. He's like, hey, remember the Revolutionary War and how you felt like you were servants to Britain? Look back, I entreat you, on the variety of dangers to which you were exposed. Reflect on that time in which every human aid appeared unavailable, and in which even hope and fortitude were the aspects of inability to the conflict that you cannot but be led to a serious and grateful sense of your miraculous and providential preservation. You cannot but acknowledge that the present freedom and tranquility which you enjoy, you have mercifully received, and that it is the peculiar blessing of heaven. So, lucky you guys, you won the Revolutionary War. God let that happen. This, sir, was a time when you clearly saw into the injustice of a state of slavery. But in this case, he's talking about the state of slavery of America to Britain, and in which you had just apprehensions of the horror of its condition. It was now, sir, that your abhorrence thereof was so excited that you publicly held forth this true and valuable doctrine, which is worthy to be recorded and remembered in all succeeding ages. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who actually wrote that quote? Thomas Jefferson. So he's quoting him back to him. Yeah. Here, sir, was a time, this is my favorite part. Here, sir, is a time in which your tender feelings for yourselves had engaged you thus to declare you were then impressed with proper ideas of the great valuation of liberty and the free possession of those blessings to which you are entitled by nature. But, sir, how pitiable is it to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution of those rights and privileges which he had conferred upon them, that you should at the same time counteract his mercies. So counteract, like go against the blessings of God in detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren under groaning captivity and cruel oppression, that you should at the same time be found guilty of that most criminal act which you most professedly detested in others with respect to yourselves. Sir, I suppose that your knowledge of the situation of my brethren is too extensive to need a recital here. I think you can take that both ways. You can say Thomas Jefferson was so knowledgeable about the country that of course he would know about the evils of slavery and of course he would hate them. But he also might be saying, like, of course you know about the evils of slavery because you own slaves and your reputation as a slave owner is not good. So I think he could be taking both ways. Neither shall I presume to prescribe methods by which you may be relieved. So I'm not going to tell you how to end slavery otherwise than by recommending to you and all others to wean yourself from these narrow prejudices which you have imbibed with respect to them, and as Job proposed to his friends, put your souls in their souls' stead. Walk them all in their shoes or whatever. Thus shall your hearts be enlarged with kindness and benevolence towards them, and thus shall you need neither the direction of myself or others in what manner to proceed herein. It's a real dad move that he does right there, which is like, just, think about it, and I'm sure you'll know what to do, what is right, And now, sir, although my sympathy and affection for my brethren has caused my enlargement thus far, I ardently hope that your candor and generosity will plead with you in my behalf, when I make known to you that it was not originally my design, but that having taken up my pen in order to direct you as a present, a copy of an almanac, which I have calculated for the succeeding year. I was unexpectedly and unavoidably led thereto. So he's giving him a gift. So he's basically like, you hypocrite, you love yourself, why don't you love other people? Oh, by the way, I made this almanac for you. And he's giving him this gift. Yeah, this calculation, sir, is the production of my arduous study in this, my advanced stage of life. For having long had unbounded desires to become acquainted with the secrets of nature, I have had to gratify my curiosity herein, though through my assiduous application to astronomical study, in which I need not to recount to you the many difficulties and disadvantages which I have had to encounter. So, despite all of the prejudices against my race, I have been able to produce this almanac for you. It is amazing. I hope you enjoy it. That's kind of what he's saying there. And although I had almost declined to make my calculation for the ensuing year in consequence of that time which I had allotted, therefore being taken up at the federal territory by the request of Mr. Andrew Ellicott, he's in high demand, but he still had time to make this almanac. Yet finding myself under several engagements of printers to printers of the state, to which I had communicated my design on my return to my place of residence, I industriously applied myself thereto, which I hope I have accomplished with correctness and accuracy, a copy of which I have taken the liberty to direct to you, and which I humbly request you will favorably receive. Although you may have the opportunity of perusing it after its publication, yet I chose to send it to you in manuscript, previous thereto, that you might not only have an earlier inspection, but that you might also view it in my own handwriting. And now, sire, I shall conclude and subscribe myself with the most profound respect, your most obedient, humble servant, B. Banneker. Awesome letter, right? It's so awesome. It's so full of like little digs at Jefferson that he can like get in there because he's also using like this flattery at the same time. So if Jefferson were to admit that they were digs against himself, he'd have to admit some really nasty things about himself, you know? So it's like, it's just a very clever, and you'll see the way that Jefferson responds. It's short. He says, "Sir, I thank you sincerely for your letter of the 19th instant and for the almanac it contained. Nobody wishes more than I do to see such proofs as you exhibit that nature has given to our black brethren talents equal to those of other colors of men, and that the appearance of a want of them is owing only to the degraded condition of their existence." So he's making a causal argument there. He's saying like slavery is the cause of degradation, not dehumanization is the cause or the justification for slavery. Does that make sense? Like the way that goes. Okay. Both in America and Africa. I can add with truth that no one wishes more ardently to see a good system commenced for raising the condition both of their body and mind to what it ought to be, as fast as the imbecility of their present existence and other circumstances which cannot be neglected will admit. I have taken the liberty of sending your almanac to this French guy, and he's a member of Philanthropic Society, because I considered it a document to which your whole color had a right for their justification against the doubts which have been entertained of them. I am, with great esteem, sir, your most obedient, humble servant. Misses the point, doesn't he? Like he gets this almanac about, he gets this whole thing about like, you know, you're a hypocrite, you need to end slavery, and he's like, hey, nice almanac. I'm glad you can do it, you know, like, wow, what an exception to the rule, like terrible. So what I want you to do now, I passed out that pathos worksheet back to you. You're gonna flip it over and do some ethos work here. So the only way, yes, the only way that Banneker is able to get away with insulting Jefferson so much is because he's establishing his credibility as a writer. You can establish credibility a number of ways. Yes, being like smart and having big words, that is a way that you can be credible, right? But there's also ways that you can flatter so that people will listen to you, or you can show that you have experience with the subject, or you can show your expertise in other ways, or you can use references to things that that audience cares about, you know? There's all these different tricks you can use. So when you're writing about ethos, you're trying to find what the writer does to get the audience to listen to him, like how they prove they're trustworthy. So many things. So I just want you to find 3 again. So cross out that bottom row. and just working with your same people.
Okay.
Alright.
Which of the three? There's the revolution one. Literally just posted the word service.
Okay, so that will be all we are doing for today. So you're going to fill out the ethos section of that worksheet. And to do that, I'm just going to post the form. So you can just do a new form for it, but you only need to do 3 instances of ethos in the background. And email me if you have any questions. I hope you had fun at the Shakespeare Festival, and I will see you soon.